So our second presenter today is Jeremy Dennis. And I hope that you all know that Jeremy has the most extraordinary project, or achievement, I should say, in Southampton, in the Shinnecock Reservation, which is Ma's house. And Ma's house is his grandmother's house, and a place that everyone used to go for comfort, for advice, for community, for solace, for everything, for meals. And at some point, within the last really 3 or 4 years, he was inspired to rebuild it, because it was in certain, it was in need of certain repairs. So he got some support, but essentially he organized the entire thing and rebuilt this house. And now it's an artist's residence and a gallery and a community center all on its own. And it's an extraordinary achievement, not only that, but I had the great pleasure of seeing a show that he curated last night at the Southampton African American Museum, which, if you have not seen it, is an absolute must. It's a brilliant little building. I mean, just absolutely fantastic renovation. It's in an old barber shop, but the interior is crispy and new, and it's playful and it's smart, and it has Ma's house spirit, I think. I mean, they're very similarly kind of simple, clean, beautiful renovations. And Jeremy curated a wonderful show on hair that you'll absolutely be delighted to see, I'm sure. And then there's also on the main floor, that's on the lower floor, and then on the main floor there's a show about the history of the museum, which had been a barber shop. It was a very popular barber shop. So it's just great. I hope you can all get to see it if you haven't yet. And Jeremy is a phenomenal photographer, a very moving, a very socially conscious photographer, but also a very terrific photographer. He's not eclipsed by his photography isn't eclipsed or overwhelmed by his messaging. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's really just wonderful art. So I hope that's clear. Jeremy.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, April, for that introduction, and for all of you coming out and supporting the church and art and community. My name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm from the Shinnecock Nation. I primarily do portrait photography and a lot of research relating to my Shinnecock ancestry. And what we're looking at is a photo titled I Could Stand Here All Night, from a series called Rise. And if you're unfamiliar with Shinnecock, I want to give you a little bit of context behind where I come from and why this image might exist. We've been here on Long Island for over 10,000 years as the Shinnecock people. So I'm really proud of that fact, and it also is an explanation behind how we have so many different sites and landscapes that are so important to us. And so the Rise project is actually a project about indigenous people reoccupying their ancestral landscapes wherever they might be and whatever state they might be in. And so in this case, I think like Linda's image, it starts with a pool, and in this case, it has to relate to water. I think we saw in 2016 how water and indigenous people are really connected. It was the water protectors in the Dakotas who protected indigenous drinking sources. And so we believe that water is life. We are water protectors. And Shinnecock itself translates to people of the stony shore. And so we've always had a connection to water that's just common with not only indigenous people, but we all need water to survive. And I think this is an ever more relevant exhibit, just because gas prices are so high, and everyone's saying turn on the Keystone Pipeline, but indigenous people are saying, well, we need clean water, we need to protect the waterways. And so it's a really interesting and nuanced issue right now. But this image that I'm happy to have featured in Empire of Water is really an image that I think talks about who really belongs in the landscape. In this case, this is an image taken in East Hampton, New York. And this is a friend, Christina, who both volunteered her representation, her image, her time, and her backyard and pool. And I'm very happy to say also Jane Martin, another artist and photographer from the East End, also volunteered for this Rise project. We did a series or an image on a arrow collector in her backyard as well. And this is a image from over 150 other images in the series. And I have a huge list of sketches and ideas to continue this work, just because it's so important to me to have people think about Indigenous representation, our continued presence as a people. I think there was a study back in 2015 by Penn State that stated 60% of Americans in general don't know a single Native person. They can't name a Native American. 40% think that Native Americans don't exist. And so as a photographer, I really love to do portraiture because it helps me break out of my shell, for one thing, and it also lets me meet new people and create new friendships and connections. And so slowly we're trying to change that demographic of structural or institutional erasure of Indigenous people, and trying to show, thanks to the church, that we're still here as a people. We don't have to do pottery to be artists. We don't have to do dream catchers or dance. Some institutions still ask, like, I love your art, but can you dance as well? So I'm really honored I don't have to do that today.
Oh, yes, you do.
We dance in different ways, but I really just want to say that the inception for this project, in addition to being about landscape, is also relating to MIT linguist Noam Chomsky. He's a professor, probably maybe the most famous philosopher and linguist living now. And he was asked by students, why are zombie apocalyptic films and TV so popular in American culture? And he was relating it back to the fact that this country is built on and has a foundation on land theft, colonization, and slavery. And we've never really had any reconciliation, no reparations, no meaningful land back initiatives. And so I wanted to create a body of work that talks about difficult issues. I'm a big believer that art allows us to, like what we're doing exactly right now, have an audience, have a conversation about difficult issues, and still be friends at the end of the day. So I'm really happy that we're able to do that. I also really love the fact that zombies is part of popular culture. It's something we all familiarize ourselves with. We know what it is, but maybe we're not the biggest fans of it. But it's the idea of the undead coming back to haunt the living. And it doesn't matter who you are, but some of us know the idea that Native Americans are a vanished race. I think Edward Curtis made that most famous through his Vanishing Race photography, where he was paid by J.P. Morgan to go out to the West to supposedly photograph the vanishing race of Indigenous people. That has happened to us here at Shinnecock as well. We've had eugenic studies about us. We've had blood quantum afflicted on us. We've just had, every time an obituary came out about Shinnecock people, they would say it's the last king or queen for some reason of the Shinnecock. And so many other ways that I think if you want to learn more, there's a great book by Thomas King called Inconvenient Indians. And it's all about the fact that I think nowhere more relevant than the East End, the fact that Indigenous people have so much land that was stolen from them, unceded land. What does that mean in an economy that first sort of paid off all of their debt through the land seizure from Indigenous people who are still there, and the fact that this is still the #1 economy on the East End. So what does it mean when we have a right to that land? That's just social justice that has never been realized. And we're not even asking for our full land back. It's just the Shinnecock Hills at this time. But Shinnecock itself is one of 13 tribes from Brooklyn to Montauk who had ancestral lands here on Long Island, and we're only 2 of 13 that still have a land base. Ours is 800 square acres. The Umpqua in Mastic have 50 acres. And I think traditionally our land used to span from Riverhead, New York, and East Quogue here to Sag Harbor. So if you ever do a land acknowledgement, you can say you're on Shinnecock land or Montauk land standing here today. But I'm a big believer that we can go beyond land acknowledgements, and a lot of the work that I propose and put into exhibits talks about, like, how can we kind of be proud and reconcile our history, even if, like, I'm not the one who personally was afflicted by genocide. You weren't the ones who inflicted the genocide itself, but we all thrive on land that was stolen and still has that legacy tied to it. And so there's so much for us to do as a people. I think that art has a role in doing that. Maybe I won't go to Congress and make the change, but maybe someone in this audience will share that story with someone else, and then we'll have a better world ahead of us. I always think about the idea that, like, we have electric cars, we're such an amazing country, we're a melting pot, we are the democratic nation, but all this is still on top of the fact that we've just erased and killed so many Native people. I think originally it was something like 90 million indigenous people in the Americas, down to somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 just after colonization. And so it's really important to acknowledge these histories, so of course we don't repeat them, but also to just empower ourselves and move better in the future. So I wonder if there's any questions about the artwork or about Shinnecock. Oh, Vivi.
I just wanted to say my favorite thing about this body of work of yours is that you are the Native American presence in these photographs.
Oh yeah, so the comment was that this is actually a self-portrait of myself, and we call it regalia, we don't call it costuming, because when you wear a costume, you like pretend you're a fireman when you're really not. So this is interesting because, like, of course, in front of you today, I'm just in a t-shirt and jeans, but in this series, it's kind of like a stereotype or trope. It's like a Indian playing an Indian in a way. But a lot of the work I try to do is taking very serious themes, making a little bit light or humorous or satirical take on certain things, just to kind of allure the viewer, say like, oh my God, what's happening here? And then they start to think about it. They see how do they connect to the story. And so in a lot of these images, it's sort of this anonymous indigenous person, and it's sometimes a kind of a stand-in for anyone that's possibly viewing this image. Like, this could be anyone that has a pool in this indescript location or house. So I hope it's something that people can empathize with and connect to. Ooh, James?
Yeah, and this image has just really stayed with me from first seeing it, and the relationship between these two people. You can't even see your face. It is so powerful. It's just, I don't even know what words to use, but it's just that, it's a beautiful photograph. It's so powerful.
Oh, thank you.
Jeremy, could you repeat what you said? We can't hear it back here.
Oh, Jane was just saying the image stayed with her. It's really powerful. Just the idea that you really can't see the person and the composition and image itself. April, did you have a question?
Yeah, I went to see the Charles Ray show at the Met. You probably all saw it. It's really a great sculpture show. But one of my favorite things in it is that he did a series of Huck Finn sculptures, and there's a point at which a hand is this far away from somebody's back, and the net effect is that the distance between the hand and the back has this charged power. There's this electricity that's really about great composition. And what I love about this photograph so much is that there's this power of the exact distance between those two figures that, to me, there's just an electricity there that resonates out like infinitely. And I think it's just an amazing, that's what I meant by the art itself because it's deeply in the art that the power of the message lives. And you just did it so brilliantly. I just love that. And anyway,
Thank you, April. The word is the charge.
It's charged space, which
Charged space.
great compositions and art all have charged space. I mean, it's always about like having a certain amount of tension that breathes within the work, I think. So there it is.
Thank you. Lori?
I was just thinking something along the same idea, but I was thinking about how you created a moment of silence and stillness, and you've created this void where the viewer has the opportunity to really think and come up with some more of their own questions or answers or solutions or ideas, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ooh.
Jeremy, I'm curious about your process leading up to this photograph, because it's obviously a stage. Now you have two people who are acting out something that you envisioned. How many photos did it take to get to this one? And how did you direct the woman in terms of that incredible facial expression that she had?
Well, I think I should preface by saying, as an indigenous artist, and indigenous people have been culturally misappropriated so many times. What I love to do with my photography is pull from other either art history references for poses and compositions, and for other contemporary photographers. So there's actually another image that I saw on Instagram that had a pretty similar kind of style of imagery. It was just a man looking at another man in a pool, and I thought, like, how can I relate that to my work and the way that I tell stories? And so that's how I came up with the idea and composition, but it's also just based on the idea of like conflict of land and who belongs. Besides that, I do a lot of off-camera lighting. So this isn't natural light by any means. There's a strobe or a flash on her porch, and this one is outside the frame on the right side, and that sort of explains the almost rim light at my shoulder, and the fact that she's just highlighted almost like a theatrical production. And I really like that effect because I look to photographers like Jeff Wool, Cindy Sherman, Gregory Crutzen, Philip Locker-DeCorsia, just because I work so modestly and without a budget. And it feels like this is like a snapshot from a movie that I just printed. It kind of makes you wonder, like, how did this person access this pool? How long did it take for this woman to come down? What are they speaking about? Did they say anything at all? And so I just really love that you approach it and get more questions than when before you saw it.
Does the one flower have any significance?
The one flower here.
Yeah.
I think it might be a marigold, but I sometimes take out elements like that. Like I'd be a very bad photojournalist because I just make everything almost perfect. But I just thought it worked to keep it in because some photographers have this rule that if you align things vertically, the post here, the flower, me with a tree, her with the balcony, it creates a more symmetrical and prettier image to look at. Oh, yeah.
Well, you know, I love how artificial it looks or movie-like it looks. But I'm wondering about the darkness. I mean, what time of day did you shoot this, and did you alter the darkness in the background?
Well, that's the other benefit of using strobes, because you can really turn down natural light in that way. So the strobes that I use can compete with the sunlight even at full brightness. So in the past, when I was in college, I would have those kind of like the wedding photographer strobe that doesn't really do that much. But these are on stands, they're pretty massive, and they can really isolate your subject matter. And so if you balance the exposure and the light settings, you could have made this totally pitch black if you wanted to, and just had it like spotlights. But I just really love the idea of focusing on the subjects. You have this sense of familiarity, but not quite the detail that maybe is natural. Do you have a question?
Well, where were your cameras at the other end of the pool?
Mm-hmm.
And then you just set a timer or something, is that it?
Yeah, luckily my camera, I shoot digital, but it has a setting that you can set it a few seconds to automatically take a photo. And so we'd probably take maybe 40 images and pick the best poses for each person, and then just combine them kind of like paper collage in a way. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, well, I love the fact that I think she's holding a coffee cup, but it is dark around her. So, you know, what ritual or what time of day, you know, this is occurring is makes it mysterious to me. Can you tell us what kind of direction did you give her for the look on her face? Because I think that look can helps create the dialogue that you're trying to create,
Oh, sure.
convey in the whole piece.
Well, just my experience growing up, I think that people secretly, unspokenly say or think that like it would be valuable or exploitative if Shinnecock people didn't exist because they have such a nice landscape to develop and build up, and they're underutilizing it. And so her face is sort of in the expression of disappointment. I think when a lot of people acknowledge indigenous people, it comes with a lot of things that are unexpected. Like, it's nice to go to powwow, but what happens when we want to practice like economic development? Like the May 2019 billboards came with so much backlash and opposition just so that we can have some revenue. And so it kind of embodies that idea of like, okay, you can have your dancing, you can have your traditions, but nothing else. You can't thrive as a people. And so it is that idea of just looking down, literally, in a way. But I also just wanted to, within the whole Rise series, I wanted to create the idea of fear as a expression. So in some of the images, I'm actually carrying people physically, and it has to relate to captivity narratives that were largely fictional, but it usually related to a white woman and a savage male, and the idea that we would just capture people and do all kinds of horrible things. The other is just the fact that, like, what if indigenous people activated their treaty rights and went back to lands that they rightfully should occupy and use resources from and be stewards of? And there's all kinds of different ways that enters into this project, because when I look at other compositions or inspiration, I'm usually looking at ghost stories, I'm looking at horror movies, and simply replacing the monster with this kind of silent, unarmed indigenous person. And I'm trying to make the point that, like, you're not there with a machete, you're like a mask, you're all bloody, you're just standing there, and that's already the same fear that it evokes. Ooh, you have a question?
I'm from Hawaii, we're in the same situation, but should we be optimistic that history can be reversed, that reparations can be made? What is your feeling about, obviously, tiny increments, but what is your feeling and your hope?
Well, Hawaii is even worse situation, I feel like, just between the indigenous people and people who go there both to live long term and for tourism. But I think that in Shinnecock's case, we pursued our 30-year kind of struggle and mission to get federal recognition to regain our land. We were promised that if we went through that whole process to prove our lineage, prove our connection to place, and show all these hundreds of documents of our personal information, basically. And we've never had a New York State governor who finally acknowledged that and sided with us and returned the Shinnecock Hills, which were so blatantly stolen in 1859 for the Long Island Railroad. And so I think there's just a lot of things that should be done, like it's so clear what to do, but we always are told it's too disruptive, it's too much like development that happened, or we waited too long to have it happen. But the ironic thing is that within the Shinnecock Hills, you have at least 3 golf courses, which take up so much land and serve so little people. You have so many Hamptons houses that are vacant and just sitting there to gain value. And you have the Stony Brook Southampton campus, which is underutilized and takes up a lot of space as well. And so I'm really thinking about this just because of climate change. We live at sea level. We're already on a march before all of that. And so at least the Shinnecock Hills is elevated in a little way. Any more questions?
I'm actually really hesitant to ask this, but do you feel like you have allies in the other populations out here, or do you just feel like you're struggling against this monumental, I mean, I'm sorry, it's sort of an emotional question, I guess, but, because I get like you want this to work this out yourself and be acknowledged, and there's always this thing of like white people going like, oh my God, I really care. And then you're kind of like, yeah, like you could possibly understand. So it's, but do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Sorry, I'm embarrassed, but I'm just gonna ask it anyway.
So in relation to Shinnecock allies, I regard all of you as allies. You're sitting here listening. It's something that historically has not happened, like white people listening to people of color talk about their stories, their experiences, and what concerns them is something that really rarely happens. And so I'm also ashamed to say that until Bell Hook's passing, I didn't know about her writing, but she speaks about the importance of acknowledging white people's efforts to be allies. You shouldn't really shun them, and you should embrace that. There are people within my community and other communities of color who just want to have the efforts within the community to just make that possible. But I think that in the case of indigenous people, we represent 2% of the entire population here in the U.S. and in Suffolk County even less. So it really is something that we need allies. Like it's not even an option not to. Like we can't be hostile, try to accomplish anything on our own. We need people who are activists. We need people who are on our side politically, socially, and economically. And so that's just something that, as an artist, I just try to put ourselves out there to say we're here, we are still here, and hopefully we'll be here another 10,000 years. So.
Well, maybe we could start acknowledging the land that we're on before every event that we do here. I think that would be a really good thing to do, and I'm a little ashamed that we haven't done that. I'm just going to admit that.
Oh, thank you. Well, the Metropolitan has the new bronze plaque, but I showed this series at, some of you might know the Packer High School in Brooklyn, but they are a very progressive school. They showed this work to some of their middle schoolers, which was amazing. But they're actually working on a similar bronze for the front of their building so that people know where they are and can acknowledge that every day.
Are you able to, I'm sorry, I'm going on, are you able to talk to schools? Do you have access to like Pearson and Southampton public schools and everything?
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's the BOCES program. Guildhall also has a great artist in the classroom program. And a lot of classrooms just reach out to Shinnecock to have that exchange. So there's definitely that. We're hoping that the next generation will be more aware, which is really optimistic.
Yeah.
Maybe the colleges now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yes.
You have another.
I just want to say that to me, the Native American presence in the pool is kind of a gentle reminder, like, hey, your pool is on stolen land. You know, that's what I see.
Absolutely. A lot of the ways I like to think about this project too, or maybe as a separate project, is the fact that like if you live in a place for thousands of years, your ancestors must be just buried everywhere. So like what does it look like if you just show them where they are or where they were displaced or desecrated? So that's another way to think about this project and how I'm trying to approach and represent it. But I should mention that you today volunteered to be a subject in this work, which is amazing. And I'm always looking for other subjects and volunteers and models. So I have a lot of different unique ideas. I also gained COVID weight, so I'm trying to get in better shape. It is a funny project because it's about uprising of indigenous people. We represent 2% of the population. So I think about like that movie 300. It's like 300 soldiers versus millions of soldiers, and you can make that even more funny if it's kind of a chubbier person trying to do that.
What inspired you to get into photography?
Well, Jen Cross is here actually from Ross School. She was one of my mentors and people who helped me actually pursue the arts. I remember in high school, the Ross School, she actually set me aside with a canvas and did oil painting with me. And so I've had different mentors like that who just encouraged me. But I just have to admit I'm not a good painter, so I ended up doing photography as a means to get to that final point really quickly and still be able to manipulate it, change things around, change colors, and still have that painterly effect. So this is printed on aluminum, so it kind of feels like a hybrid between painting and photography. But thank you so much for listening and appreciate your time.